Welcome everyone. Tonight we are doing chapters 61 and 62 in 70 faces. The first chapter is the numerical significance of placement. So I'll explain that one of the 70 methodologies through which we reveal the inner dimensions of the Torah is where a word is placed in a verse, or where a parsha is placed in the Torah, or where a verse is in a passage. All of this has significance, as we will learn. And then the second chapter we're doing is relationship between numbers. Here we'll do between two different numbers, like for example, 6 and 7 or 7 and 8. And when a certain number is used symbolically and it runs through the whole Torah. So here the relationship is with the number itself. If a certain number appears in many different places, we need to look for what is the common theme. What's the common teaching that this number is appearing over and over again? So that's what we will be doing tonight. So we'll start with, for those who have the book, on page 580, with the first one. And this is something we've discussed different times, but there's a new perspective here that we're going to be adding. And that is when the Arizal spoke about the event called Shvirat HaKelim, the breaking of the vessels, when the light of the previous world, Olam HaTohu, was too pure, too strong for the initial vessels of the world of Tohu. They shattered, and from those shattered vessels with sparks of light in them, that is, in a sense, what makes up this world. That's why the Arizal called this world Olam HaTikun, the world of rectification, because it is made up of broken vessels. And that's why there's such an emphasis on what's called Tikkun Olam, of repairing the world, fixing the world, rectifying reality. So the Arizal says that there were 288 shards that broke in this incredible event called Shvirat HaKelim. So this is not a super symbolic number, 288. Again, this is something we've learned before, but it's a good review. So where did the Arizal learn this from? Everything has to have a source in the Torah. So he learns it from the second verse of the Torah, which says, "V'ha'aretz hayta tohu v'vohu, v'choshech al pnei ha'tahom, v'ruach Elokim mirachefet al pnei hamayim." That the earth was chaotic and void. And there was darkness on the face of the abyss, and the Spirit of God hovered above the waters. The word for hovered is mirachefet. And so the Arizal points out that the first and last letters of this word mirachefet are a mem is the first letter, and the last letter is a tav, and it spells met, died. And the middle letters, resh, chet, pei, equal 288. So he was darshaning, he was elucidating that 288 shards died in what's called Shvirat HaKelim. We're going to go back to this incident later in the class from a different perspective. So why am I bringing this up is because Rav Ginsburg points out that this word mirachefet is the 18th word of the Torah. And it's hard for me to follow the chats a lot of times, but I saw that bracha in the song that we just played, where it says, Uteshuva, Utefilu, Tzedakah. All three words begin with a vav. And she pointed out very beautifully that 3 times 6, vav equals 6, equals 18. So that's the whole thing, is just, what are we praying for on Rosh Hashanah is basic, is to live, is absolutely to live. Bracha, we'll go back to you, okay? You'll hold it. But I just wanted to point out that I saw that and it fits in here. So mirachefet is the 18th word of the Torah. 18 is chai. And yet the Arizal says that 288 sparks died. So here we have life and death. So what's the significance that this is the 18th word of the Torah? So Rav Ginsburg points out that the spark of light in each one of these fallen vessels, fallen shards of the vessels, is what is keeping them alive, in a sense, is animating them. And even though we talk about, many people, when we talk about the fallen sparks that are in these vessels, so the idea is to redeem the sparks. But Rav Ginsburg taught something very, very profound, is it's not just to redeem the light in the vessels. The light has been hovering, in a sense, above the vessels and keeping them alive. And it's not just the light we have to redeem, but we have to redeem the physical material world, is what really needs the fixing. Because the light itself was incredible, but it was the vessels that didn't have the strength or the ability to hold the light. So that is our first example that the 18th word of the Torah is, it means life. And yet the Arizal said, these are the 288 that died. So here you have the whole mystery, the whole paradox of life and death encoded in this word. The next example, we're going to just go to the 25th word of the Torah. And the 25th word of the Torah is the first time that the word light is mentioned. Vayomer Elokim Yehi Or. And God said, let there be light. So in many, many Hasidic Sfarim books, it's pointed out that the 25th word of the Torah is hinting to the holiday of Hanukkah. Holiday of Hanukkah happens on the 25th of Kislev. And Kislev is towards the darkest time of the year. It's many years it actually comes out during the winter solstice. And so here the 25th word is light. So it's a hint that in the future, this light, which Rashi says was hidden, called the Oraganuz, the hidden light. God hid this light away because also it was too awesome for the world as we know it now. And so different commentaries ask, well, where was it hidden? Where is this light? It doesn't say that God took the light away. It says he hid this light. So we're told it's hidden in the Torah. Every time we learn Torah, we can access this hidden light. It was the light of the menorah. It's the light of Shabbos. And it's the light of Hanukkah. So that's this hint of the 25th word of the Torah being light, is hinting to that in the future there would be a holiday that would, in a sense, celebrate the hidden light and reveal it. But now we're going to go much deeper. And this is a Torah from Rabbi Ginsburg. It's really an awesome Torah. 25 equals the word ko, chaf he. And we're told that all of the prophets, including Moshe, would prophesy by saying, Ko Amar Hashem. This is what God has said. Ko Amar Hashem. This word ko appears in many places. It's a whole teaching in of itself. But in our paradigm here, ko is talking about prophetic experience. But we say that even though Moshe did prophesy with the word ko, he also prophesied, and he alone, with the word zeh. Zeh davar asher tziva Hashem. This is the matter that God has commanded. No other prophet used the lashon of zeh, like this, exactly this. Ko, chaf in Hebrew sometimes means like, approximate. Ki, before a word, means like this. So Rav Ginsburg points out, here we have the 25th word of the Torah is light. And that equals ko. Zeh equals 12. So what is the 12th word in the Torah? Darkness, choshech. So here you have two types of prophecy. One is light and one is darkness. So we'd say, well, shouldn't it be the opposite? Maybe all the other prophets should have prophesied with zeh, because that's connected to the 12th word in the Torah, which is darkness. And only Moshe was ko, because it's connected to light. So here's the Torah that Rav Ginsburg gives over. And this is a very, very deep idea, is that in the higher worlds, there's a place where darkness is higher than light. Because when we say the infinite, we refer to God as the Ein Sof. So Ein Sof, Ein means nothingness. And the Ein Sof is, the metaphor is, it's like the womb from which everything comes from. And when you think of the womb, we think of darkness. So the Zohar revealed there's this idea called the illuminated darkness, where the illumination of the darkness is even more bright than light itself. Because everything comes from the Ein Sof. Everything comes from the nothing. That's what we're taught, that this whole creation is yesh me'ayin, something from nothing. So here, Rav Ginsburg says that that's why Moshe, he is prophesying with the word zeh, because this level of darkness in the upper worlds is even higher than light. So if you look at it as, we'll call it a ladder, in the higher worlds, first comes darkness, just like in the Torah. Darkness is mentioned first and then light. There's darkness and light. And then in the lower worlds, you have light, and then you have darkness. Darkness is, as it were, on the bottom, has a certain negative connotations, the darkness. But here we could see something very, very beautiful, is the Shema has 25 letters. 25 letters is ko. But so you would think maybe that when we say Shema, we should say with our eyes open, because the 25th word in the Torah is light. So we should have our eyes open when we say the Shema. But what do? Not only do we close our eyes, but we put our hand over our eyes, a double darkness. Why? It's because sometimes, Reb Shlomo taught this, sometimes to be able to see clearly, you have to close your eyes. That's why a lot of times in prayer or meditation or at high moments, we close our eyes because that darkness is higher than light. So all of this is alluded to that the 12th word in the Torah is choshech, is darkness. And the 25th word is light. This teaching needs a lot of thought to it, but I gave it over in a like a capsule form, but it's something that we could think about very, very, very deeply. Okay, the next example is on page 582, and that is that the first mitzvah given to the Jewish people in preparation for coming out of Egypt. There have been a few mitzvahs given before, but they were to individuals. This is the first mitzvah given to the Jewish people, is a chodesh hazeh lachem. This month, meaning the month of Nisan, this is the first of the months, the months of the year. That is the first mitzvah. The first mitzvah is making Nisan the first of the months. That's what we know, that we have Rosh Hashanah. We have a new year of years coming up in 3 weeks. But the new year of months is in Nisan. But more than that, the oral tradition says that along with this mitzvah, God revealed to Moshe the secret of time and the secret of the Jewish calendar. So it's much more than just make this the first month of the year. This is how do we use our time? How do we become a master of time? Some of you might have my book called A Master of Time. And one of the first chapters is the discussion about this verse. So this verse is the 1820th verse in the Torah. 1820th verse in the Torah. So everyone would say, okay, so what's the significance of that? So there is a verse that you may have heard before. Sod Hashem lireyav. The secret of God are to those who have awe of him. So if you take the words, the secret of God, I think this was last week or the last time we learned, the method was multiplying words by each other. So if you take Sod times Hashem, Sod equals 70, times Hashem, which equals 26, 70 times 26 equals 1820. So here we'll make a simple connection. So what is the secret of God? The secret of God is becoming a master of time. If one wants to learn the secrets of God, it's in understanding time and becoming a master of time. And the further secret is that the name of God appears in the Chumash exactly 1820 times. So here you see that this 1820th verse is connected to the secret of God, the secret of time, the secret of becoming a master of time. And why is this the first mitzvah? Because we're being told on a deep spiritual, mystical level, but also a very practical level, that if you want to go out of slavery, then you have to learn how to deal with time. And the difference, a slave, their time is not their own. They have to do what they are told. They're not empowered with time. But a free person can become a master of time. That's one of the secrets of why it's the first mitzvah, is in preparation from coming out of Egypt. God is saying the first step is you have to take charge of your time, because now you're going from slavery where you weren't in charge. As a free person, you will be in charge. So that is our next example. Now on page 583, we're going to do it a little bit differently. That we're going to look at the 7th and 8th Parsha of the Torah. In other words, there's also a placement and a meaning. We're going to say now, Vayetze. Parsha Vayetze is the 7th Parsha of the Torah, and Vayishlach is the 8th. So obviously, we would want to try to understand, well, what's the connection between 7 and this Parsha Vayetze, and what's the connection of 8 with Vayishlach? So very, very quickly in Vayetze, the first verse is Vayetze Yaakov mi Beer Sheva v'yelech Harana. And Yaakov went out of the place called Beer Sheva. To this day, it's called Beer Sheva, the well of 7. And he went to Haran. So the whole parsha begins with the word 7. And then, if you look behind you, I put different pictures up here, and both of them you'll see ladders. So there are many, many different midrashim that give over when Yaakov, in this parsha, Vayetze, when Yaakov has his dream of the ladder that is entrenched in the earth and reaches the heavens, how many rungs were there on the ladder? Well, one of the versions is there were 7. And you'll see in both of these pictures that I did many, many years ago, there are 7 rungs in the ladder. Because 7 is such a symbolic number, as we'll be seeing shortly. Next, Yaakov pledges to work for 7 years in order to marry Rachel. And then when Lavan switches Leah for Rachel, he now will work another 7 years he got to marry Rachel 7 days later, but he had to work another 7 years. And then in the parsha, it tells about the birth of almost all of his children except Binyamin. And Leah gave birth to 7 children, 6 boys and 1 girl. So here you have the number 7 repeating itself over and over and over again. The next parsha is Vayishlach, which is the 8th parsha. So what does that parsha have to do with the number 8? So this is part of kind of jumping ahead to the relationship between numbers, which is our next chapter. And that is 7 always represents what's called the natural cycle. And 8 is always like the infinity sign. It's always like one above nature, one above the ordinary cycles, miracles. So right in the beginning, the first verse says, Vayishlach Yaakov malachim el Esav. Yaakov sent messengers to Esav to tell him, I'm coming back to the land after 20 years. And he sent him gifts and a whole story there. But Rashi says an amazing thing, because in almost all translations, it says Yaakov sent messengers. Rashi says 2 words, malachim mamish. This is like Rashi is using the word mamish 1,000 years ago. Malachim mamish, which means real angels, not just physical human messengers. He sent angels. So this is already hinting that this parsha is like there's like one above. He's sending angels. That's symbolic of the number 8. And then this is the parsha where the famous wrestling match happens between Yaakov and, it says a man, but it's also an angel, Esav himself. He's fighting with himself. He's fighting with God. And he merits a new name, Yisrael. So the whole idea of meriting a new name is like going from 7 to 8. It's going from we'll call it his natural birth name to a new level, because when a person gets a new name or a letter added to their name, it means a new identity. So Yaakov gets a new identity here, which is the number 8. At the end of the parsha, this is where something that we've mentioned before, and it goes back to the first examples we gave. At the end of the parsha, it goes to a long lineage of Esav, very long actually. And in there is a passage that says, these are the 8 kings that ruled in Edom before there was a king in Israel. These are the 8 kings. And then it goes, this king ruled and he died. And this king ruled and he died. It goes through 7. And the 8th is, his name is Hadar. And he's the only one whose wife's name is mentioned, Mehetabel. And it doesn't say that he died. So these are the 8 kings, and the last king, the 8th king, because the first 7 died. So this is the source of the Zohar and the Arizal in explaining Shvirat HaKelim, the breaking of the vessels. Each one of the kings who ruled and he died is one of the Svirot breaking. So when we talk about the breaking of the vessels, we're talking about the Svirot in the previous world, Olam HaTohu, that broke. But the 8th one, he lives, and when we finish tonight, I'll mention something more about this. And one last thing. I don't remember if it's in the Gemara or the Midrash. Ask, why were there 8 kings who ruled in Edom before there was a king in Israel? How did that happen? So one of the answers that is given is that when Yaakov, even though he defeated the angel of Esav, and he merited a new name, when he actually met him the next day, it says 8 different times that he bowed down to him. Yaakov bowed down to Esav 8 times. And the sages saw in this that, it was good manners. It was supposedly his older brother, and he was trying to give honor to him. But the sages felt that he went a little bit overboard, considering he had won the wrestling match, and said because he bowed down 8 times, that's why there were 8 kings that ruled in Edom before there was a king in Israel. Okay, the last one is an amazing one on page 586. And this is from the Vilna Gaon. And he says like this. He points out what the 5,708th verse of the Torah is. So you might ask, well, did he start from Bereshit and he counted till he got to 5,708? How did he know this? So it's actually not as difficult as it sounds, because in many chumashim, and especially the art scroll, at the end of every parsha, it will tell you how many verses there are in that parsha. And it gives over, in the art scroll, it gives over a short Torah from Rabbi David Feinstein, the son of Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, who does a drasha on why are there that many verses in that parsha. So technically, the Vilna Gaon could have just gone back to Bereshit and just added up. He didn't have to start and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He could add up how many verses, because there's a tradition of exactly how many verses, and they have meaning. So he got he got to the 5,708th verse, and what it is, and Hashem your God will bring you to the land that your fathers possessed, and you shall possess it. This is talking in the future, where Moshe Rabbeinu is giving over to the people what will occur in the future. And he tells them there'll be a long exile, but in the end, you will do tshuva, you will return to the land. And again, it says, for people who don't have the book, it's in Deuteronomy 30, chapter 30, verse 5. And Hashem, your God, will bring you to the land that your fathers possessed, and you shall possess it. So it's pointed out, after the Vilna Gaon, but when was 1948, when the state of Israel was established in the Hebrew calendar? 5,708. So this is like, wow. This is like, wow. Okay, now we're going to the next chapter, 62. And we have a little bit less time for this one. But we'll start with a simple one on page 589. And this is the relationship between numbers. So this is one that most people are familiar with, is the relationship between the numbers 6 and 7. And we see it because there's 6 days of creation. And then there's Shabbat. There's 6 years of working the land. And then there's Shemitah. There's 6,000 years predicted for this cycle of history. And then the 7th millennium of Mashiach. So you have a pattern here. But the pattern goes even deeper. The pattern goes back to the first word of the Torah and the first verse. The first word of the Torah has 6 letters, and the first verse of the Torah has 7 words. So here already, we'll call it engraved in reality, is this very, very important relationship between 6 and 7. Again, 6 letters to the first word, Bereshit, in the beginning, but there's 7 words. So this already is the relationship between 6 and 7 that plays itself out in the weekly cycle, in years, and in millennium. And even deeper in the first word, even though there are 6 letters, you also have the word Shabbat. If you permute the letters, it spells out Yirah Shabbat, or Ya'er Shabbat, the awe of Shabbat, or the illumination of Shabbat. So here in the first word, you have 6 letters, but you have the word Shabbat, which is the 7th day, already inside of it. Okay, so that's the first idea, but along with that is the idea of the menorah. The menorah, and the menorah, of course, has 7 branches, but its construction is one central shaft and three on each side. So the three on each side are the six, and the middle is the seventh. In fact, many commentaries say that that's one of the secrets of the menorah, is it's the secret of the 6 days of creation, but the middle one is Shabbat. Now, along with that, we have a phenomenon that applies only to the number of 6. And you might have seen this before. If you would take 6, let's imagine the circles are coins, and you like try to make a circle of them. This is the only number it works with. If you tried it with 5 coins or 10 coins or 20, whatever it is, it only works for 6. That it creates a space for a 7th circle in the middle. There's no other phenomenon like this in numbers of the 6 and 7. And this is also one of the secrets of the Magen David. The Magen David, I'm looking quickly. Okay. The point I want to make is, okay, like here. Every Magen David is, usually we think of the Magen David as being 2 triangles, one triangle pointing up and one triangle pointing down. But if you see very clearly, there are actually 6 triangles, but they create a central octagon. That is the 7th space. And that's why there's a very deep connection between the menorah, which has 6, 3, and 3, just like this has, let's say the triangle going up is 1, 2, 3, and the one going down is 1, 2, 3. And this is like the middle shaft of the menorah. They're based on the same concept of 6 and 7. Okay, our next example is the relationship between 1 and 4. The relationship between 1 and 4. The first time we see this in the Torah in a word is the word aid, which means mist. Aleph, Dalet. Aleph, of course, equals 1. Dalet equals 4. And this is in what we call the second retelling of the story of creation, where it says that even though we learned in the first telling that God created vegetation on the 3rd day, but in the retelling of the story, it says that nothing had actually grown until man came. And it says a mist came up from the earth. So this mist is Aleph Dalet, which is 1 to 4. And this mist is what, is in a sense, watered the garden. And Rashi tells us an amazing thing. It's like, why didn't anything grow until then? In other words, in the 3rd day, it was all vegetation was created in we'll call potential. God created the energy, the life force, the reality of vegetation. Rashi says an amazing thing. It says nothing had grown because man had not been created, and reality needed man to pray for moisture, for rain, for things to grow. And we see that in the Shema, that the idea of following God's word is connected to the rains coming. And when we don't follow God's words, it says God shuts up the heaven and there's no rain. So that's in the story of creation. And then it says when God created the Garden of Eden, it said that a river came out of the garden, came out of Eden to water the garden, and it split into four streams. And then the Torah names them and describes them. But here, again, the idea that there was one river and it breaks into four streams. Then Rav Ginsburg points out that the Eitz HaChaim equals, those words, Eitz HaChaim equals 233. And the Eitz HaDat Tov Ra equals 932. 932 is exactly 4 times the Eitz HaChaim. So we have this relationship between the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But it's significant that the one here is the Eitz HaChaim. And it split off. Now, we can connect this now to modern cosmology. And we're told that there are 4 basic forces in physical material reality: the electromagnetic force, gravity, the strong nuclear force, and the weak nuclear force. And this is the whole search for what's called the unified field theory, or the theory of everything. That science recognizes that these 4 forces are basically unified. And that's why they explain that right after the Big Bang, all 4 forces were unified. But as the universe began to cool, the 4 forces split off, just like the river coming out of Eden to water the garden was one river, but it split into 4 separate streams. So this is an amazing connection with modern physics. And then we could also connect it to the way that we learn Torah. This series is called 70 Faces, but we know that there is what we'll call it a more streamlined version of how we learn the Torah called Pardes. Pshat, Remez, Drush, and Sod. 4 levels. In other words, the Torah is one. The Torah is one. God is one. But there are 4 basic levels that we learn the Torah. We learn the literal, the alluded to, the metaphorical, allegorical, symbolic level, and then the mystical, spiritual level. So this is also connected to the idea of the relationship of 1 to 4. Now, the next one that we're going to do is on 594. And this is, here we took between 6 and 7. We did a little bit of 7 and 8, 1 and 4. Now we're going to do, when we have a number that appears in many different places, so we want to know, like, well, what's the common thread between all of these numbers? So we're going to do 2 now. So 1 is on 594. I'm just looking for the other one. don't see which page it's on, but I'll just do it. We're going to do 40 and 400. 40 appears in many places. And here, I just want to give over very quickly the idea that 40 is the letter mem, and it's connected with water, because the word for water begins with a mem and ends with a mem. And the idea of water is flowing. And we'll see that water is used in transition. So our first example of 40 is how many measurements, they're called seah. How many seahs do you have to have a kosher mikvah? So the minimum is 40 sah. In English, it's S-E-A-H. 40 measurements. I'm not sure exactly, they're connected to quarts and gallons. But the mikvah is a place of transition. When a person converts, they go to the mikvah. When we have a new vessel that needs to be immersed, it's immersed in a mikvah because it's going from non-Jewish hands to Jewish hands. There's a transition. When a woman finishes menstruation and the time of the month to be together with her husband again, she goes to the mikvah. Many men go to the mikvah every Friday as a transition between the 6 days of the week and Shabbat. So we see that here water, the water is connected to the letter mem. It's connected to the idea of transition. So going all the way back to the flood, we see that the flood was for 40 days and 40 nights. So it's pointed out as we went, one world is being destroyed and another world is being created. So the world is in transition. In fact, many people use the metaphor as it were, that the whole world was immersed in a mikvah because it needed purification. Then we have the 40 days that Moshe Rabbeinu was on Mount Sinai. And that was a huge transition from before having the Torah to after having the Torah. And that transition happens in 40 days. But if you look really carefully, Moshe Rabbeinu was on Mount Sinai 3 different times for 40 days. The first 40 days was to receive the Torah. He comes down, they're worshiping the golden calf, and he breaks the tablets of the law, the luchot. And then he goes up for another 40 days to pray for forgiveness. And then God agrees, and he goes back up for another 40 days to receive the second tablets. So all 40 days were transitions from receiving the Torah and then receiving pardon and atonement, and then transitioning into the second tablets. And then, of course, we wandered for 40 years. So in other words, from coming out of Egypt to coming into the land is another 40-year period. And also, even though there's different versions, but one of the versions of the different stages in Moshe's life is his first 40 years were in Egypt. And then when he had to flee Egypt, he was 40 years old. And he was 80 years old, and the Torah even tells us this, when God appeared to him at the burning bush. And then he lived, and then he led Am Yisrael for 40 years. So his 120 years were made up of 3 periods of 40, and each one was a transition. Each of the 40 years were like completely different from what happened before. And they also say about Rabbi Akiva according to tradition, he also lived to be 120. And he started learning Torah at the age of 40. So here you have the number 40 appearing all over the place, but we see that there is a connection. There is a relationship between any time that the number 40 is used. The last one we'll do is the number 400. We'll do the same idea. The number 400 appears in a number of different places also. And we're going to make the connections very quickly. The first time it appears is when Abraham buys the cave of Machpelah to bury Sarah. And he pays 400 pieces of silver for it. Now, what's the significance of that? So this is the first acquisition of the land of Israel. Until then, Avram had been in the land, but he didn't own any of the land. And so it's said that when he buys Marata Machpelah for 400 pieces of silver, in a sense, he was establishing a chazaka on the whole land. He was making a kinyan on the whole land. Now, this is significant because in the Gemara, when they're explaining, well, how big is the land of Israel? Just like today, if you look at an encyclopedia, it will tell you how many square miles every country is, how many people live there. So in the Gemara, it says, well, how big is Eretz Yisrael? So they say 400 parsang by 400 parsang. And the significance of this is, in a sense, recognizing that when God promised the land to Avram, and he finally buys a piece, it's as if he was buying the whole thing. And I see that Bracha mentions that the word Marat HaMachpelah, Machpelah and Marat begin with a mem. So this is also a beautiful hint. 40 and 400. Of course, 400 is 10 times 40. Now, where does the number 400 appear again? So it appears actually we talked about the Parsha Vayishlach, when Yaakov meets Esav again. Remember, that's where he bowed down 8 times. Also, when he merited a new name by defeating the angel of Esav. So there it says, when Yaakov sent messengers, or like Rashi says, malachim mamash, real angels, it says that the messengers came back and said, Esav is coming along with 400 men. Why 400 men? What's the significance? Here, Yaakov is meeting Esav at the border of Eretz Yisrael. He's been out of the land for 20 years. And now he's coming back into the land. And Esav is coming, it seems, to stop him. So he's coming with 400 men to keep Yaakov out of the land that is 400 parsang by 400 parsang. So that's just amazing connections. But the number 400 appears again. Now, I should mention that when Esav actually comes, it does not mention these 400 men again. They seem to disappear. So where did they go? Spiritually, where did they go? The next time 400 is mentioned is when David has been anointed by Samuel, Shmuel and Navi, in secret. Saul is still the king, but David has been anointed. And Saul intuits this, and he wants to kill David. And David has actually a number of opportunities to kill Saul, but he doesn't. He refuses. It's his father-in-law. And just that was the nature of David. It's just like, if God wants me to be king, then he's going to have to pull it off. I'm not going to kill Saul in order to become king. So it says that David had to run away. He was hiding for his life. But it says that 400 men joined him. 400 men joined him. And so I learned from Rav Ginsburg that spiritually, these 400 men are, in a sense, the Gilgul of the 400 men of Esav that have reached a tikkun, and now they're joining David, in a sense, as a rectification. Now, there's one other connection with 400. It's brought down in the Zohar that there are 400 worlds of divine pleasure beyond this world. Now, there's one of the, we'll call it metaphors, or one of the Kabbalistic terminology for the world to come are 400 worlds of divine pleasure. So here the connection is that Eretz Israel in this world is the headquarters of these 400 worlds of divine pleasure. Just like Eretz Israel is the manifestation of the Garden of Eden in this lower reality. Okay, so we'll end there, and we'll end with a blessing that, first of all, that we merit to inherit the entire land. As everyone knows, we're still fighting for our survival here, even though all the papers play us up as the Goliath and our neighbors are the David, but the reality is quite the opposite. So that we merit to inherit the land that's 400 parsing by 400 parsing, and that each and every one of us in our preparations for Rosh Hashanah, as we try to connect to Hashem, to connect to the root soul, is that we have a taste of these 400 worlds of divine pleasure.